Today, I am breaking down the top three hiring myths that kill startups fast, why they cost you millions, and exactly how you can identify and avoid them. Also, share some cold hard data and facts, along with some painful lessons that I personally had to experience as the first recruiter at an early stage startup. That way, you don't repeat the same mistakes. Fair? Let's dive in. So, what's the real cost of a bad hire? Most managers think that a bad hire costs maybe 30 to 50% of the hire's salary. That's a great figure. If you Google, that's probably the first figure that comes up. So, if you hire somebody and you're going to pay them 100K, it's going to cost you 30 to 50K in time, effort, and energy to hire them, right? But that's just a conservative estimate. And when I did some research, the real cost can be exponentially higher. Consider these three facts. The Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, they're like the gold standard. They're the Harvard when it comes to HR recruiting data. They and the US Department of Labor cites that 30 to 50% number. However, the Harvard Business Review also cites that 80% of employee turnover is rooted in bad decisions. So if you make a bad hire, you can actually not only lose that person, but you can lose other great people on your team because you didn't hire the right person. So that 30 to 50% is starting to go up. SHRM also notes that this cost can rise 2 to 5x a higher salary. And that encompasses turnover, lost productivity and momentum, impacts on team morale, right? People quiet quitting. In addition to that, the rehiring time of refilling all those seats. So that means that 100K hire could cost you 250K, upwards up to $500,000 in time, effort, energy, pain, and rehiring. Hiring isn't just about filling seats. It is the highest stake game that startups play. Get it right, and it could just accelerate and explode your growth. Get it wrong, and the clock on your runway and your cash starts ticking faster. I joined Wobot Health as the first recruiter, and I think I was around employee number 13. And within a few years, we were a little over 100 employees and had raised $120 million for our Series B. Sounds exciting, right? But here's the most important thing that people don't know. Along the way, there were a few bad hires that almost derailed the entire company, costing us months, momentum, cash, and putting my, reputation and my manager's reputation and credibility at stake. So ignore these three myths at your own peril. Myth number one is underestimating the time, effort, and energy that hiring actually requires. Myth number two is believing more people just equals more productivity. Not quite. We're going to debunk that one too. Myth number three is hiring for problems that you might face later, right? So, for each of these myths, I'll also give you at least one actionable thing that you can do today, this week, because I see a lot of content on YouTube where people are talking about in generalities about hiring. If you're a founder or a startup hiring manager, and you're ready to stop gambling and start hiring, check out the link in the description. You'll find a short masterclass on the exact system I use to help leaders like you hire with more confidence and fewer mistakes. Let's dive into myth number one. Myth number one is underestimating the time, effort, and energy hiring actually takes. The myth goes something like, hiring is just another task on my plate. I'm busy and I can squeeze it in between the things that I have on my plate. But the truth is, recruiting can be a full-time job. And if you neglect it, that cost multiplies into millions. As an early stage startup, you have little to no brand. Nobody knows you, and respectfully and with great love and respect, nobody cares about you, right? Which means that you have to focus on what you can control. Become a great storyteller. So when you're growing and you're improving your company, it's easy to stay heads down because you need to get product, you need to get revenue, you need to get customers. and you kind of save this networking thing for later. Personal story, when the managers I worked with made an intention to have weekly networking conversations, their time to hire decreased by nearly 30%, and their quality referrals almost doubled. And personally, the last three jobs I've had all came from personal or professional connections. I'm actually working on a contract right now, my friend. You know who you are, who helped me out. Um, but that came from a text. I think I texted this friend on a Thursday, and by Monday, I was working on a contract. That sounds nice, but that was years of social equity that and relationship building that had occurred, right? So here's the actionable takeaway. Block dedicated time out each and every single week. Honor it, respect it, just like any other meeting on your calendar. And do this not just when a seat opens or when you need to hire. Think of hiring like building a bench, not filling a hole. A mentor once told me that you need to drill your well before you draw from it. And I think that's the perfect analogy for networking. So here's some numbers just to make it clear for you. If you spent 1 hour a week sending 10 messages a week, that's 40 messages a month. Even if you took a month off, let's say 40 messages times 11 months, that's 440 messages you could send a year. Let's say a conservative 10% conversion rate of people that actually reply and want to speak to you. That's 44 new genuine connections per year from just sending 10 messages a week, 1 hour a week, 4 hours a month. I know you can do that because I've done it all my career and it made all the difference. So here's a little template that you can use that I use myself. And you can send it in the connection note request in LinkedIn. Hey, first name, you're doing some great work. I love your background. It really stood out to me. Would you be against a 20-minute conversation? No real set agenda. I thought it just might be exciting and energizing to connect with fellow founders, or insert your role, connect with fellow engineers. I would love to know how other engineers are experimenting and tinkering with AI, right? Make it your own, make it personalized, but do it, put it on the counter, honor it. Now for myth number two. Myth number two is more productivity equals more people. If I only had more people, I could get more done. Not quite. The truth is, adding headcount without structure and clarity and systems just slows you down. Every new hire requires onboarding time, requires communication overhead, requires management complexity, right? And there's something I discovered researching this video called Brooks Law, which says that adding more people to a project, and if it's later in the project, only makes the project later. This was coined by Fred Brooks. He was a world-renowned computer architect and computer scientist at IBM, known for developing some of their most phenomenal and world-renowned systems. But there's also a law called Metcalfe's Law, and this talks about communication overhead. So every time you add a new person to your team or a new connection, the number of connections and communication connections and channels increases. So that's more emails, more Slack messages, more one-on-ones, right? And then there's just the onboarding and ramp up time. I roll my eyes and I would be a billionaire if I had a nickel every time a manager told me, I need someone who can hit the ground running. And I get where that's coming from. It's coming from a place of, I'm investing a lot of time, energy, and money into this person. I expect results. And that's fair. But here's the truth. Nobody hits the ground running. There's always some type of ramp up time, even for the best people. And that's actually why our retention was so high at Wobot Health, because we actually took onboarding seriously. So many of our employees would tell us horror stories of them joining other companies and those companies just throwing them in the fire, right? Just expecting them to figure things out on day one. And you've likely experienced that in your own career, whether it's earlier in your career when you might have worked in retail or the service industry, or later in your career, right? More people plus more structure, coaching, and support can equal more productivity. So here's the actionable takeaway. There's a great book you should read. It's called The One Thing. And in The One Thing, they talk about the focusing question. So use this question before you open a role and ask, what is one thing that I can do, that my team can do, such that by doing it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? I love that question. It's a very difficult question to ask, but in the difficulty lies the gold. Often the answer isn't hire more people, it's to clarify priorities, it's to fix a broken process, it's to automate a task with AI. This question forces you to solve the root cause of the problem before you just throw bodies at the problem. And finally, my favorite, myth number 3, hiring now for a problem that you might, emphasis on might, that you might have later. And the myth is we all know we need to fix this problem, or we know we're going to have this problem in 6 months. There's this really impressive, really smart person on the market. Let's just hire this really smart person now and have them figure it out later. As hiring managers like to call this in the start, opportunistic hiring, right? And I like to call it what it really is. It's reactive hiring. And the truth is, this can drain your cash, create confusion on your team, and it often backfires. Now, take this with a grain of salt. This can work, but most of the time it doesn't. And when it doesn't, as I said, it costs you millions and momentum. So, startups constantly change, constantly pivot, sometimes on a monthly basis. Take Airbnb, for example. They couldn't predict that COVID would have happened. Instacart, for example, they couldn't predict Amazon buying Whole Foods. These are things that have to be taken head on real time, right? So keep the main thing the main thing. Betting on future roles reduces your ability to prioritize what you have in front of you. And it just leads you to building your team around hypothetical problems instead of real ones. So, a personal story, I know that at Wobot we had a few technical hires that we made a few months early, like 6 to 7 months early, anticipating the launch of a new enterprise customer, but that launch was delayed. And what happened? This meant some of those technical opportunistic hires ended up being underutilized, frustrated, and eventually left sooner than we expected. That hire drained our budget and again drained our momentum. It hurt the team's morale, all because we tried to get ahead on a problem that really hadn't materialized yet. So here's the actionable takeaway: run a pre-hire post or pre-mortem, excuse me. So before opening a role, gather your team, or even just do this as a thought exercise yourself. If this hire fails or ends up being underutilized in the next 90 days, what will have been the reason? And I love this question because it beautifully forces you to test whether this role is tied to a clear current pain, or is it just a speculative future scenario that you're worrying about, right? If the pre-mortem reveals vague goals, at all costs, delay that hire. Hire just in time, not just in case. So, those are the $1,000,000 hiring myths, lies, mistakes that kill startups fast. Underestimating the time, effort, and energy it actually takes to hire great people and not taking a long-term approach. Believing more people equals more productivity. Hiring for problems that you might face later. So remember, every hire is either building your runway or burning your cash and potentially damaging your reputation and your credibility as a leader at your company. So don't let these myths cost you millions. And as I said, if you're a founder or a startup hiring manager and you're ready to stop gambling and start actually hiring, check out the link in the description. You'll get a short masterclass on the exact system I use to help hiring managers and leaders like you hire with more confidence and fewer mistakes. Peace out. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for joining me.